Hi guys, it's Ryan Gill from Gill's Primitive Archery, and today I'm going to teach you how to make your points scary sharp for hunting. We're not going to work with a completed point, we're just going to work with a flake that I've just kind of worked down to a basic edge here. I'm going to kind of work it down just a little bit more and explain some things to you, and then I will show you how to do an edge on one side that a lot of people do, and then they stop and say that's good enough, when you could take it to the next level. Now I know that there's people out there wondering, are my points truly as sharp as I say they are? And without a shadow of a doubt, I can promise you they are absolutely scary sharp, and yes, sharper than probably 95 to 99% of the points out there sold for hunting. It might be misconstrued me saying that I'm the only one that can do this, or I'm the only one that you can get truly sharp points from, and that's not the case. But every point that I have ever handled personally from somebody else that was making them for hunting was not as sharp as it could have been. Can you kill a deer with a dull point? Yeah, you can kill them with other people's points that aren't as sharp. But just like hunting with steel broadheads, would you rather have one that was really sharp, or would you rather, or do you want one that's only kind of sharp, or just barely sharp? Yeah, you can kill deer with them if they're not super scary sharp. But in the modern name of ethics, and for better blood trails and better performance overall, let's get them really sharp, and I'm going to show you how to do it here in a minute. Somebody say, well, did primitive peoples have their points that sharp? And we're not really sure, because remember, these things have been in the ground for hundreds, thousands of years and subject to a certain amount of erosion. They were also already shot, so we may not know. They may not have even been sharpened. The ones you find, they may not have even been sharpened as of yet. So you don't really know. Did they have the ability to make them super sharp? Yeah, I'm sure they did. And just like today, there's probably people that are better at sharpening than other people, and the same thing back then. And did they kill deer and other animals with fairly dull points? Yeah, I'm sure they did. But primitive does not mean crude. Primitive just means without the influence of modern technology. I'm using deer antler tools, and this is raw Georgetown shirt. It's nothing crazy special. Nothing here is man-made. This is natural materials that I'm working with that they had, and I'm going to teach you, hopefully with a lot of practice, how to get your points just as sharp. So, and why would you want to get your points that sharp? If you can't answer that question by yourself, I'll tell you, because the difference between a sharp point and a dull point is a dull point being shot through a deer and grazing by an organ can just push that organ out of the way as it goes by, or just barely cut it as it goes by. If you have one that's extremely scary sharp, especially with really sharp serrations, when it goes by, instead of pushing it out of the way, not only will it cut it, but it will grab it, hang on to it, and rip it. And that's going to result in a faster death. I would say 9.9 times out of 10. So it just seems foolish to me to go into the woods with points that could be sharper. So now we're going to show you how I do it. We're going to start with a really dull edge, just for some comparison's sake. Okay, again, not a whole point. We're just working with, a flake that's just kind of been bifaced down just a little bit on both sides with a pressure flaker. No big deal. Most people, and this is an important part of the step, or in the sharpening, is to just run a set of flakes down. Unfortunately, what happens with a lot of folks, they sharpen their points and they're almost just grinding and crushing the edge. And that's not gonna make a sharp point no matter what you do. Other people, they'll come down and they'll pressure flake the edge right off like that, whether they do it one side or the other side, and they'll feel it, and they'll say, well, that's, you know, that's actually pretty sharp. And it is, and it kind of feels kind of sharp. And you could rub it on you a little bit, and you might get a little, you know, scuffing here and there. I showed in my video about taking the piece of leather and cutting it, and it does have the ability to cut a little bit. Again, some people may watch that and say, is that a real video? Did he do something in that? I don't lie about things. I'm here to offer information. Of course, I want you to buy my points, but not everybody's going to buy my points. People want to make their own. But I want to pass along the information that they can be sharper. But see, people go along and they'll sharpen these edges down, and they want to make a smooth, flat surface. That's what most of them do. Or they make a very tiny serrations, just like this. And this is very, very, very common. Maybe you do this, maybe you don't, I don't know. And it might look really good, and it might even feel pretty sharp. Could you kill a deer with this edge right here? You probably can. In fact, I know you can because people have done it before, but does that make it truly sharp? No, it doesn't. So here we go. I'm just working with a little antler pressure flaker. I like to keep grinding it down thinner and thinner. And you say, well, how do you grind it? You're not really an elbow napper if you're, you know, using a bench grinder. Well, when you make as many points as I do, sometimes you do cheat and use a bench grinder, because otherwise you just simply can't factor in all the time it takes to do it. But as you can see from the back of this rock that's got an awful lot of bone dust on it, I got a flat edge. And if you see me at nap-ins, I'm oftentimes just sitting here for 15-20 minutes just grinding them down. So yeah, if I'm at home and I'm working, I may put them on the bench grinder. If I've got 12 points I got to try to get done in a day, which is a ridiculous amount, then yeah, I'll probably put it on a bench grinder because I want people to have really sharp points. So I don't care what edge you use, I don't care what tool you use, make sure it's got a thin point on it. That's going to be really important. Now, when you go along the edge the first time, what we're doing here is we're going to make serrations. Okay? Now, just because a point has serrations doesn't mean that it's sharp. You can have dull serrations. But if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm taking one flake off. I'm not trying to grind the edge. I take one flake. And they're fairly close together. I don't like them right side by side. I want them basically the same thickness of the tip of my tool. I want that much space in between each one. Now, I don't sit and measure it. I have a kind of an eye for it. So now we'll go along, and I've got one little serrated edge. And this by itself is pretty sharp. And this is where some other people get to, and it's, oh, okay, now that's sharp, I'm going to stop. And I can rub this on me and it doesn't really cut. It's close, but it's not quite there. Now we need to go along and do inside the same serration that we just did on this side. Inside, not the top. We're not knocking the serration off. We're going inside the valley of each one. One click. Okay? One click of the flaker. Sometimes it'll grind just a little bit, and that's going to happen. I don't want you to come in here and just try to hog it out. That's not what we're trying to do. We're one click. Okay? And it's because we can't really abrade at this point because we're trying to get a good sharpened edge. You may end up grinding a little bit, but we can go back and kind of fix that too. Now the idea, of course, is we're not necessarily trying to run a flake all the way to center, but we want to run it pretty far along. And so what we're doing is not only is it taking a flake from the inside, but it's actually catching the sides of each one of these serrations and sharpening it as we go. Now, I've gone up and down each side, okay, and it's serrated how a lot of people would serrate it, and I'd feel that and say, well, that's decently sharp, but it's not crazy sharp to me. That's sharp enough to kill a deer, but you know what? We can get it sharper. A lot of people say, okay, it's got a sharp edge, I'm going to stop. No. Now I'm going to flip it over again, and I'm going to do the same thing. Possibly not on every one, but oftentimes I will. I'll go along, and if it needs it, I'm going to take another flake out. And it's okay if they start getting a little bit deep, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. Now, we don't want great big huge serrations, and also I do admit that I kind of make it look a little bit easy to sharpen this. You may do it and say, man, he does it in 2 minutes and it's really, really sharp. How come, I'm not doing it that fast? Remember, I've dedicated several years to learning how to get points sharp. That's been my main goal, is to get them as sharp as I can. Now, I still look at this, and it's sharp. It's got a great edge, but it still can be sharper. Now I go back and I analyze every single one of these serrations, and I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, okay, I got one here. I can make this better. I'll take one click, and then I look at it some more and I say, okay, well, I got one here. I'm going to make it sharp. And sometimes now you're flipping it over and you're going back and forth. And the idea is you don't want to crush, you want to remove a clean flake. That clean flake is what leaves a really sharp edge behind it. So, I mean, we're getting down here. It's starting to get sharp because it's refining the edge even more. So if you've already stopped by this point and you're afraid of ruining your point or anything like that, you're not getting it as sharp as it could be. And this is literally what I'll do, is I will sit down and analyze the edge of every single point. And sometimes as you reach in further, it'll actually knock a lot of the tips of the serrations off. Some of them actually have kind of some flat tips. They're actually still really, really sharp, but they're still not as sharp as they need to be. And I'm not worried about that yet. I'm still working on the inside. I want each one to have a razor sharp dip in between. One of my sayings that I've always talked about with sharpening stone points is I want needle sharp tips and razor sharp dips. That's how you get them super sharp. Now, not every single one is going to necessarily be as sharp as the next, but if you get a few on here that are super sharp, that's the important part. You obviously want as many as you possibly can, and I'll go back and fix, but if you get one that's got a little step fracture or something and you just can't get it, don't freak out about it, just move on to the next one. If you've got one or two kind of dull serrations, kind of work them down and get them out of the way, but make room for a really sharp one to come in behind it. So, okay, now I'm looking at this edge, and it's pretty uniform on the inside. That's what I'm looking for right now, not the top. I'm looking for the inside. I'm looking down it, and I want it to be a straight edge. I don't want one side to come out here and one down to here and over and over. I want a straight line in the middle, and I still have one here. I'd like to take it out. And basically, when you think it's good enough, look at it some more and say, how can I make it better? Okay, now that's a heavily serrated edge right there, okay, and it is very sharp, but it's not sharp enough. This would be great for a stone knife. It's going to have a little bit more hard use on it, where it's going to hang around. You can really force on it pretty good, but we can still make this better. Now I got one on here. I don't know if you can really see it right here. That thing is absolutely needle sharp, and that's what we want the rest of these to be. Now if it's flat and it's super sharp, we can get away with that. We don't have to necessarily take it down to a needle. It could be basically like a single razor blade that's laying flat, but we need to check it too to see how. But I can tell you right now that this one, I don't want anything to do with running that across me, because it's gonna cut me really bad. So now we'll go along to the tips of every one of these serrations, and we just want to chip the tiniest amount off the sides, because we want to try to make them pointed. We don't want to knock the point off, but basically what we're doing is we're sharpening the sides now with very, we're not grinding, tiny clicks. We definitely don't want to knock them off because they're really important. We want nice, sharp needle tips on every one possible. And we're not necessarily focusing on making it look excellent. Because a lot of times people will do serrations when they're making points and they say, well, I want them to look all uniform and perfect. And there is something to be said about having points that are uniform and perfect, that they can be very, very sharp. But that's not the main goal. The main goal is to get each tip absolutely needle sharp. Now, as I go along and work this, sometimes you actually get in and you can take another click off the inside as you work it down. In doing this, we're just not giving up when it's good enough. We have to make it the best that it can be. Now this edge here is getting pretty darn sharp. In fact, I just cut myself right there. It's not super sharp, but it is dang close. See, now that I've even done the needle sharp tips, I've gone back and looked and say, okay, I can still fix a couple of these spots and make them better. If, like my dad used to always say, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. So sometimes if I get those edges where they're needle sharp, but I can still go back and take clicks off the inside and make them even sharper, I'm going to do it. Then I'll go back again and sharpen these little tips. We want to just get them absolutely perfect. Again, we don't want to grind the material off. We just, it's a little bit of a click that's going to remove that flake. We're not breaking it off, we're chipping and removing it. So now we're looking much sharper. Now if this was a real point, obviously it wouldn't be this big anyway, but I'd try to probably take this dip out. I'd just go to like this end and this end, take them down a little bit because I want them to be very similar heights, but they don't necessarily have to be either. But then what I like to do is I test it on the back of my hand. If it grabs and pulls your skin like it wants to cut, then it's pretty darn sharp. Okay? A lot of times I do run little nicks in here. I'm not pushing and trying to cut because it's going to cut. There's without a doubt no doubt in my mind that if you take this and run it across your skin, that it's not going to lay you open. I mean, this is a big buffalo hide, and that was one scrape. I wasn't even trying to penetrate all the way through. That's a sharp point, and that is a great test. You take this other side and do that, and it makes a little line, but it's not the same. Okay? But don't give up on the sharpness. If it's not as sharp as you think it needs to be, you go back and make it sharper. And I still look at this point and I say, it's pretty sharp, but I think I can make it sharper. Can it kill a deer the way it is right now? Absolutely. It is scary sharp right now, but it's still not sharp enough in my opinion, but it is sharp enough. But if it can be sharper, then that's where I want it to be. So that's the part that I need to really stress to you guys in doing this, is when you get parts, get points and you're testing them, see if, test them here, and if you think it can be sharper, don't quit. Just keep going. Now you see my hand, I'm not bleeding real bad because I haven't pushed it, but I got tiny little scratches and I haven't tried. If I rake this thing across me, it's gonna cut me. If you saw how it did here, that's gonna cut me and I'm gonna bleed all up. This is the test. I'm not saying again that I'm the only one that's able to do this. You can too. It takes practice, it takes time, and that is really, really sharp. If your points won't cut you and make you bleed with just the tiniest checks, that's all I'm doing, is I'm pushing just hard enough to see if it grabs. And oftentimes as soon as it slips, that's when it digs in. If you don't like to cut yourself, which I don't really like to, but this is how I can get a good feel for it, don't do it on yourself, because you end up looking like this after every time you do it. And sometimes it's way worse than this. If I'm doing obsidian, I got to be really careful, because it'll cut you bad. Take a piece of leather and run it across. I mean, that's one cut, and I'm not even trying to force it down through. This is the sharp edge that I'm working with here, right? And I pull this thing fairly sharp. That's the test right there. I mean, that's nothing to cut with. It's nothing at all. It is super sharp. That's the test, okay? If your point, take the other side, and it doesn't cut like that, it can be sharper. That's how sharp it should be. Can you kill deer with less? Sure. But why would you want to shoot a deer with a point that can't cut when you can kill one with a point that does that? Are my points truly sharp? Absolutely, they are. There's no lie about it. Can other people get their points this sharp? Yeah, I hope they can. But I've sat down with knappers, and I've tried to teach them how to do this, and it's not something that you can likely do the first time and get a super sharp point. It takes practice. You don't learn how to make a point in one day, and you're not going to learn how to sharpen a point in one day either. But if you work at it, you can be successful at sharpening your own points.